Buenos dias, amigos, and welcome back to the www.plaidavenger.com, where we just don't want to hear the news. We want to understand the news, and man, there's been a hell ton of nasty, nasty-ass news coming out of Mexico in the last week or two, with one little highlight that was good. In fact, let's entitle this podcast, Cool Calderon Bags a Barbie. What? Calderon bags a Barbie? What's that about? Well, let's talk about the players first. Felipe Calderon is the president of Mexico, and he has been president since the year 2006, and he is personally responsible for launching a full-on federal army campaign to go up against, defeat, and destroy the drug cartels, which have been controlling much of northern Mexico, if not the country as a whole. Many analysts are afraid that the drug cartels are going to defeat the Mexican government and take over the whole state. That's a bit much of an exaggeration, but it is very serious business because this drug war has turned exceptionally nasty in the last few years since Calderon's been in power. Now, who's the Barbie? Did Calderon go to a local Walmart and buy a pretty little Barbie for himself? Not quite. The Barbie in question is Edgar Valdez Villarreal, aka La Barbie, named La Barbie for his dashing good looks, his green eyes, fair complexion, and the fact that he is a human piece of shit, trash, cartel, thug, murderer who was the head honcho in one of the many cartels running the drugs from Mexico into the United States. Now, why was it such a big deal that it was caught? Because it is a very big, shining bright light. It is a win in the win column for Calderon's administration in a sea of otherwise depressing news. What depressing news? Well, unless you had your head stuck up the ass end of a burrito grande, you probably know that Mexico is fighting this huge, gigantic drug war with massively escalating violence. Again, just since Felipe Calderon took office back in 2006. It's only been 4 years. Now, he has scored some wins. They've taken out a couple other drug cartel kingpins, but La Barbie may be one of the bigger ones, and certainly the only major success they've had here in the last 6 months to a year. Now, it's actually his crackdown. It's him sending in the army to face off against the cartels, which has escalated the violence and turned the otherwise drug wars between just the Mexican army and the cartels into a cartel versus cartel turf war in which the civilian population of Mexico is starting to suffer horribly as well. Now, who are these cartels we're talking about? What do they do? Well, a cartel is essentially like a mafia, all right? And in this case, they're a drug mafia, organized crime at the very highest level. This is basically an international syndicate. It's an international, multinational business that's all based on illegal stuff, namely narcotics, cocaine being number one, amphetamines and dope in there as well. But these cartels are particularly nasty in Mexico. They also deal in human trafficking, child trafficking, sexual trafficking, gun trafficking, and pretty much any other damn thing with the name trafficking on it besides automobiles. Now, there are many cartels in Mexico at this point, drug cartels. There's about 6 or 7 by name. About 2 or 3, perhaps 4 of them are the major players. And I'm not going to go into detail. This is not about the cartels themselves, but you can look at this map and see the kind of zones of influence these bastards have. And the Los Zetos, or the Gulf cartel, controls much of that Gulf region. And the Sinaloa cartel, one of the bigger ones, controls the big central Mexican zone. And the Tijuana cartel. Those are the big players right there on the U.S.-Mexican border in northern Mexico, where much of the action is, where much of the violence is. Although the violence and the drug movement and all the illegal activity movement is starting to take over vast parts of Mexico from north to south. And again, this has gotten terribly nasty just in the last 4 years. What do I mean by nasty? Broad, open, wake up in the morning, the sun comes out in broad daylight, gun battles between the army and police and these cartels. These cartels are now so powerful and so ballsy, they could give a shit less if the police show up. If the police come knocking on their door, they're like, okay, time to go to work in the streets of Mexican cities. I mean, that is a level of violence that you're not accustomed to in the U.S., and most people in the world aren't accustomed to. That who cares about the police? We're more powerful than the police. We'll fight the police. We'll fight the army. That is the upper echelon of scary crime. They have now also diversified their violence They are using bombs now. There have been 3 car bombs that have gone off in Mexico in the last couple months. And actually someone threw a grenade at a U.S. consulate building. What? This is starting to sound like full-fledged international terrorism. The drug violence in Mexico, just since Felipe's took office, 4 years, has killed more than 28,000 people. The Mexican murder rate has gone through the roof. It's not the highest in the world. It's been a gross misexaggeration by much in the press, but it is much higher than it's ever been. 28,000 just in the last 4 years. There has also been Cartels murdered a gubernatorial candidate who was running for governor last year after they kidnapped him. I think they killed his kid too. They've killed 3 mayors just in the last month and a half. 3 mayors! They've stepped up intimidation of newspapers and radio stations and television stations. They've kidnapped journalists and demanded stories be printed or demanded airtime. I mean, what kind of criminals say, put me on TV or I'm going to kill you? Usually they run away. And the level of violence on civilians has gotten terribly nasty as well. They've had headless corpses turn up just last week, strung up on an overpass of an interstate. You had a grave, a mass grave of 70 Central American migrants was discovered. This is just really bad stuff. Attacks on civilians, people just firing machine guns into discotheques of crowded teenagers. That is the level of intimidation, terrorism, and violence that is plaguing northern Mexico right now. Now, other news agencies, other news sources, your nightly news in America, they're all idiots, and they're only going to report on these grisly details. They're not going to tell you what the hell's really happening and how much you should really be worried, because this is penetrating into America in a very big way. More on that in a second. I want to answer some questions, though. I don't want you just to hear this stuff. I want you to get it. And what I'm going to spend the rest of this podcast right now on is answering these questions. Why is this happening here? Why here? And why right now? I mean, if this has been going on for some time, and drugs have been implicit in American society and imported into the U.S. for a long time, why is it here in 2010 that this stuff is so wildly out of control and permeating into the U.S. in a very big way? Why here? Why now? Reason 1. The Mexican government has been wildly corrupt for a very long time, and I'm talking top to bottom. From the local police in local towns to state police, to even people in the army, and yes, people in the federal government. Hell, the drug czar for the Mexican government 10 years ago was arrested on drug charges. The drug czar, the guy in charge of fighting drugs, was running drugs. That is a level of corruption that has been implicit in the Mexican government, and again, all levels, all the way down, for a very long time. This did not happen overnight. This has been happening over the course of 80 years. Now, this happened because the government of Mexico has been dominated for the last 80 years, or from 1920 to about the year 2000, by a single political party. The political party is called the PRI. If you're interested, you can go Google it. Now, the PRI, it wasn't that they embraced drugs. I mean, they won the presidency, and they carried the presidency for 80 years and controlled the Congress and all that stuff. And they weren't outright crooked. It wasn't like they were all on the take, but many of them were. And they kind of allowed the cartels of Mexico to grow in the last 20 to 30 to 40 years, really the last 20 to 30. And they were focused more on not stopping the cartels, not stopping drugs, but kind of making sure the cartels didn't fight each other. You with me so far? So they made sure the Sinaloan cartel didn't mess with the Gulf cartel and vice versa, and kind of told them, go about your business, do whatever you're doing, because all the drugs are going to the U.S., what do we care? And we're all on the take, so thanks for the money. But don't fight each other and keep violence against civilians to a minimum, because you really don't need to do that. Just conduct your business. And that's what happened for a very long time. So what changed? Why is it getting so violent now? Because that PRI party that was basically implicit in allowing this to grow was voted out of office in the year 2000, and the other political party in Mexico gained the presidency and control the government. And that political party was the PAN, the PAN. Now, again, you don't need to know all the Mexican political parties, but kind of dig this.